How does the tech that runs our world really work? We break it down to its fundamental truths. This is First Principles.
You're on a video call. The face on your screen is half a world away. Maybe they're in London or Seoul or Buenos Aires. They laugh and you hear it instantly. The video is crisp, the connection seamless. It's so normal, so mundane that we don't even think about it. It just works. But if you had to guess, if you were forced to picture the journey that person's voice and image are taking to reach you in less than a second, what would you picture? For most of us, the image that comes to mind is probably a satellite. A gleaming piece of machinery orbiting high above the Earth, catching a signal from a rooftop in one continent and beaming it back down to another. It's clean, it's high-tech, it's what science fiction taught us the future would look like. And it feels right. Our phones are wireless, our laptops connect to Wi-Fi. The internet feels like it lives in the air. We even call it the cloud. But that image, that intuitive, common-sense assumption about how our world is connected, is almost completely wrong. The truth is stranger, more audacious, and much, much more physical. It involves thousands of miles of cable, crushing abyssal pressures, undersea volcanoes, and a surprising trick of light that was discovered by watching it pass through a stream of water. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the magic of global communication. We're going to drain the oceans and expose the real physical backbone of our digital world. We are going to find the internet. To understand the miracle of what we have today, we have to understand what it replaced. We have to go back to a time when the world felt impossibly vast, when the oceans were not just bodies of water, but barriers to connection. The year is 1850. Sending a message from London to New York is a physical act. You write a letter, you hand it to a courier, it gets put on a ship, and with good winds and a bit of luck, it arrives in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. In that time, governments could fall, markets could collapse, families could be torn apart by tragedy, all in silence. The hunger for a faster way was immense. The telegraph had already revolutionized communication on land, turning electricity into a messenger that could outrun the fastest horse. But the Atlantic Ocean remained. 3,000 miles of cold, violent, and largely unmapped water. The idea of spanning it with a single, unbroken wire seemed less like an engineering challenge and more like a fantasy. But it was a fantasy a man named Cyrus Field became obsessed with. Field was a paper merchant, not an engineer, but he had a talent for raising money and an unshakable belief in the project. The challenges were monumental. They needed a cable strong enough to survive being dragged along the rocky, mountainous ocean floor, yet flexible enough to be spooled onto a ship. They needed a ship big enough to carry the immense weight of the cable, and they needed to do it all perfectly, in one go. Any snap in the line meant starting over. Their first few attempts were catastrophic failures. Cables snapped and were lost to the deep. But they kept trying. In 1858, they finally succeeded. 2 ships met in the middle of the Atlantic, spliced their cables together, and sailed in opposite directions, unreeling the copper thread behind them. It worked. Queen Victoria sent a 98-word message to President James Buchanan. It took 17 hours to transmit. For a brief moment, the world was connected. But the celebration was short-lived. The engineer in charge, a man named Wildman Whitehouse, believed that to send signals faster, he needed to blast them with higher and higher voltage. A few weeks later, he effectively fried the cable. It went silent. The project was deemed a failure, a laughingstock. But Field was relentless. He raised new funds and commissioned the largest ship in the world, the SS Great Eastern, a vessel 5 times bigger than any other ship of its day, to carry a new, better insulated cable in a single continuous piece. After another failed attempt where the cable snapped and was lost, they returned in 1866 and finally laid a durable working telegraph cable across the Atlantic. This time it held. Communication that once took 2 weeks now took a matter of minutes. It was a revolution, but it was also just the beginning. The telegraph was dots and dashes, slow and painstaking. The world needed more. It needed to send voices, pictures, and eventually, the torrent of data that defines our modern lives. The copper wire that had been a miracle in the 19th century was about to become a bottleneck. The problem is one of bandwidth. Think of it like a pipe. A telegraph cable is a tiny straw. You can send puffs of air through it, your dots and dashes, but you can't get much through at once. A telephone cable, which also used copper wires, was a bit bigger, maybe a garden hose. It could carry the analog waves of a human voice. But a high-definition movie, a real-time video call, that's not a trickle of water. That's the Niagara Falls of data. You need a pipe of almost unimaginable size. And for decades, it seemed the only way to get that kind of bandwidth across an ocean was to leave the ground entirely, to go wireless, to go to space. So, why not satellites? It's the most common question and the most common misconception. It seems so logical, but the answer comes down to 2 very fundamental problems: speed and space. The first problem is the speed of light. It's the ultimate speed limit in the universe. But it's still not infinite. A typical geostationary satellite, the kind used for communications, orbits about 22,000 miles or 36,000 kilometers above the Earth. For your video call to get from your computer to that satellite and back down to your friend in Tokyo, the signal has to travel a round trip of at least 44,000 miles. Even at the speed of light, that journey takes time, about 1/4 of a second. It doesn't sound like much, but it's enough to create that awkward, annoying lag you sometimes hear on international phone calls. You talk over each other, you pause, you say no, you go ahead. It's called latency, and it makes real-time conversation feel unnatural. For data-heavy applications like online gaming or financial trading, that 1/4 second delay is an eternity. The second problem is space or bandwidth. The amount of information you can transmit over a radio wave is limited. While satellites are fantastic for broadcasting television to wide areas or providing connections in truly remote places where you could never lay a cable, they simply do not have the carrying capacity, the sheer bandwidth, to handle the petabytes of data that now flow between continents every single second. Trying to run the modern internet on satellites alone would be like trying to fill every swimming pool in a city using a single fire hose from a helicopter. You just can't move enough, fast enough. So the engineers had to look elsewhere. The answer wasn't in the sky. It was back where Cyrus Field had looked more than a century before, the bottom of the ocean. But this time, it wouldn't be a copper wire carrying a trickle of electrons. It would be a strand of pure glass, thinner than a human hair, carrying a torrent of light. This is the point where our intuition breaks down. How can you send a signal made of light through 5,000 miles of glass? Wouldn't it just leak out? Wouldn't the glass be too cloudy? Wouldn't the signal just fade to nothing after a few miles? To understand how it works, we don't need a degree in physics. We just need to remember what it's like to be a kid in a swimming pool on a sunny day. Imagine you're underwater. You look straight up, through the shimmering surface, and you can see the sky, the clouds, the world above. The surface of the water is a window. But now, stay underwater and look not straight up, but at an angle, towards the surface further away from you. Something strange happens. The window disappears. The underside of the water's surface becomes a perfect, silvery mirror. You can see a flawless reflection of the bottom of the pool, of your own feet. What you're seeing is a fundamental principle of physics called total internal reflection. It's not magic. It's a rule about how light behaves when it moves from one medium to another, like from water into air, or in our case, from glass into another material. When light traveling through a dense material hits the boundary of a less dense material at a shallow enough angle, what physicists call the critical angle, it doesn't pass through. It doesn't escape. It reflects perfectly. 100% of the light is bounced back as if from a perfect mirror. A fiber optic cable is the most brilliant, most extreme application of this simple principle. It is, at its core, a light pipe. The center of the cable is a strand of incredibly pure glass, the core. Surrounding that core is another layer of glass, called the cladding. The two layers are made of slightly different types of glass, engineered so that the cladding is less optically dense than the core. The difference is subtle, but it's everything. When a laser shoots a pulse of light into the core, it travels down the fiber and hits the boundary between the core and the cladding. But because it's hitting it at a very shallow angle, it doesn't escape. It perfectly reflects. It bounces off the interior wall, travels a tiny distance, and hits the other side, and it reflects again, and again, and again, millions upon millions of times, zigzagging its way down the length of the fiber for miles, for hundreds of miles, for thousands of miles, with almost none of the light ever escaping. The glass itself is so astonishingly pure that if the ocean were made of it, you could see the seafloor as clearly as if you were looking through a window. The signal can travel over 100 kilometers before it even needs to be amplified. So, a fiber optic cable isn't a wire in the traditional sense. It's a tunnel with walls made not of silver or steel, but of a fundamental law of physics. It's a waveguide for light. The data itself is encoded in the light as a series of pulses. A pulse of light is a 1. No pulse is a 0. Billions of these ones and zeros flash through the fiber every second, carrying our emails, our movies, our voices, our entire digital lives, bouncing their way across the ocean floor in a silent, invisible stream. This is the first principle. You can trap light in a pipe of glass and send it on a journey, but knowing the principle is one thing. Building a system that spans the globe, that can withstand one of the harshest environments on Earth, is another thing entirely. The reality of these cables is a marvel of engineering. The core, that strand of glass carrying the data, is fragile and thinner than a human hair. To protect it, engineers wrap it in a series of increasingly tough layers, like a Russian nesting doll of protection. First, there's the plastic coating, then a copper sheath. Now, the copper isn't there to carry data. It's there to carry electricity. The light signal, pure as it is, does eventually dim over long distances. So every 50 to 80 kilometers along the cable's length, there's a device called a repeater or an amplifier. These are basically signal boosters, about the size of a suitcase, that are spliced into the cable. They listen for the faint incoming pulse of light and then fire an identical, fresh, powerful pulse down the next leg of the journey. These repeaters need power, and that power is sent from land through that copper tube as a high-voltage direct current running the entire length of the cable. Around the copper tube, you have layers of steel wires, providing tensile strength so the cable doesn't snap when being laid or pulled up from the seabed. Finally, the whole assembly is encased in a thick, durable polyethylene jacket, making the finished product about the size of a garden hose. The final object is surprisingly unremarkable to look at. It's just a thick black tube, but inside that tube is the nervous system of our planet. Laying these cables is a slow, painstaking process. Specialized ships, some as long as a football field, carry thousands of miles of cable spooled in massive tanks. For weeks on end, the ship moves at a crawl, maybe 5 miles per hour, slowly unreeling the cable and letting it sink to the ocean floor behind it. In shallower waters, near the coast where the risks are highest, a special underwater plow is often used. It's dragged behind the ship and it digs a trench in the seabed, laying the cable in the trench and covering it over simultaneously, burying it safely away from fishing trawlers and ship anchors, the two biggest threats to a subsea cable. But once you get into the deep ocean, thousands of meters down, the cable is often just laid directly onto the abyssal plain. The route is mapped with incredible precision to avoid underwater mountain ranges, active volcanic vents, and steep, unstable cliffs that could cause submarine landslides. It's a journey through a world we know less about than the surface of the moon. And what happens when one of these cables breaks? Because they do. Maybe a ship accidentally drops anchor on one in a shallow area. Maybe a deep-sea earthquake triggers an underwater avalanche. The effect can be immediate and dramatic. In 2008, a cable cut in the Mediterranean disrupted the internet for 75 million people across the Middle East and Asia. When a break is detected, repair ships are scrambled. Finding the two broken ends of a garden hose on the dark, rugged floor of the ocean, miles beneath the surface, is an incredible challenge. They use remotely operated vehicles, underwater robots, to locate the cable, cut out the damaged section, and then hoist the two ends up to the ship. On the deck of the ship, in pitching seas, highly skilled technicians will splice the microscopic glass fibers back together, a process that has to be done in a sterile clean room built right on the ship, and then seal the repaired cable and carefully lower it back to the ocean floor. It is a high-stakes deep-sea surgery, performed to heal the veins of our digital world. So we have our light pipe, built to withstand the bottom of the ocean. We can send pulses of light, our ones and zeros, across continents. This is already an incredible achievement. It explains how we can send an email or load a web page from another country. But it doesn't quite explain the sheer, overwhelming capacity of the modern internet. It doesn't explain how millions of people can be streaming different 4K movies and conducting flawless video calls all at the same time through the same cable. A single stream of flashing light, no matter how fast, just doesn't seem like enough. And it isn't. This brings us to the final, most profound aha moment. The deepest, most elegant secret of the global internet. The real story isn't about one beam of light, it's about a rainbow. Remember shining white light through a prism in science class. The single beam of white light enters the prism, and on the other side, it fans out into a beautiful spectrum of colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. The prism reveals that white light isn't one thing. It's a combination of many different colors, or wavelengths, of light traveling together. What if you could do that in reverse? What if you could take a beam of pure red light, a beam of pure blue light, and a beam of pure green light, and combine them into a single beam, send it on a journey, and then use another prism at the other end to split them apart again? This is the principle behind the technology that makes the modern internet possible. It's called wavelength division multiplexing, or WDM. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most important and underappreciated technologies of our time. Here's how it works. Instead of one laser sending one stream of light pulses down the fiber, engineers use dozens, sometimes over 100 different lasers. Each laser is tuned to produce a very specific, very precise wavelength or color of light. Some of these colors are in the visible spectrum, but most are in the infrared. To our eyes, it would all be invisible, but to the equipment, these are all distinct channels. Each of these different colored lasers can be turned on and off independently, carrying its own unique stream of ones and zeros. One color might be carrying your video call. Another, a sliver of Netflix's data. A third might be handling millions of dollars in financial transactions. All of these different colored streams of data are then combined using a device that acts like a reverse prism into a single, dense, multicolored beam of light. This combined beam is what actually travels through the subsea fiber optic cable. It zips across the ocean, a silent, invisible rainbow trapped in glass. At the far end, when it reaches the other continent, the beam is fed into another special device, a multiplexer, which acts like the prism from our science class. It separates the light back out into its original constituent colors. The specific red light is sent to one router, the specific blue light to another, and so on. This is the key. This is the secret to the Internet's almost infinite-seeming capacity. A single hair-thin fiber isn't a single-lane road. With wavelength division multiplexing, it becomes a 100-lane superhighway. Each color is its own private lane, carrying its own traffic, completely unaware of the others. This is how a single cable, no bigger than your thumb, can carry terabits of data per second. The equivalent of tens of millions of high-definition movies being streamed simultaneously. It is an act of such incredible elegance. You don't make the pipe bigger. You simply discover a way to fit exponentially more into the pipe you already have. You're not just using light. You're using the color of light. So let's trace the journey one last time, from its magical surface to its physical, fundamental truth. You click a link to watch a video hosted on a server in Ireland. That request, a tiny packet of data, leaves your computer. It doesn't fly up to a satellite. It travels through wires to a local exchange, and from there, it's converted into a specific color of light. It joins a rainbow of other data and is funneled into a transatlantic fiber optic cable at a landing station on the coast. That pulse of light, your click, then begins a journey of 3,000 miles, bouncing its way through a glass thread on the cold, dark ocean floor. It travels at nearly the speed of light in glass, passing silently under shipping lanes, over dormant undersea volcanoes, through vast plains of silt. Along the way, it's caught and re-amplified by repeaters powered by a current from the shore. Less than a 20th of a second after it started, it arrives at another landing station in Ireland. There, it's split from the rainbow, converted back into an electrical signal, and sent to the data center. The server finds your video and sends it back to you along the exact same path, a different color in the same rainbow, on the same piece of glass. What we call the cloud is not a cloud at all. It's a machine. A planetary-scale machine whose most critical components are lying in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of our world. We have wrapped our planet in a web of glass, and through it we send rainbows. That is the Internet. It's not weightless or ethereal. It's a physical, tangible, astonishing piece of engineering built on a simple, beautiful principle of physics. Our modern world, with its instant connections and borderless communities, often feels like it has transcended the physical. It feels like we live in a world of pure information, but it's a comforting illusion. Our digital existence is profoundly, deeply, and vulnerably tied to the physical planet. It rests not in the heavens, but in the silent, crushing dark at the bottom of the sea.
You've been listening to First Principles. Until next time, stay curious.